Now, first off, let's start first looking at what we are going to build. So we will be building a basic demo today where you have to be authenticated to access some routes, okay? So this is our home, and you can see because I'm not authenticated, I can see a message asking me to sign in, okay? So, and same thing in my navigator, you can see I have a sign in button. What I will go, I'll go and sign in and use a valid email, admin@example.com, then my password, and let's go and hit sign in. So you can see as I'm signed in, you can see that I have different view now of my dashboard, and you can see it is the same route, okay? So different text, welcome to the Auth demo, that is my username, welcome back admin Lulu, and you can see I have two buttons here, view profile and admin dashboard. So the user I use at the moment to log in, it is an admin user, okay? So I can have access to my dashboard as well. And if you can see my navigator as well, it have now profile button, I have admin also, and I have sign out, okay? So if I go to profile, I can see my profile details here, and you can see the role is admin. And then if I go to the admin, you can see I have some different view to see some, for example, sensitive data, okay? If you want to call some other APIs or whatever you want to do. Now, if I go and sign out, you can see it's taking me back to the login page and asking me again to sign in. Now I will use a different user, which is just a normal user. So I'll say user at example.com and I'll put the password and let's sign in. And you can see as soon as I sign in, I have a different view of my dashboard. I don't have view admin dashboard anymore. I only have the profile button. Same thing in my navigation. I don't have the admin button in my navigation anymore. Okay, so basically, even when you authenticate, we have a different views depending on your role. Okay, and that's what we call role-based authorization. Now, if I go to my profile, I can see also my details. I can go and sign out. So this is what we are going to be building together today. So make sure you don't skip any part of this video so you don't miss any important step or information along the way. App. But wait, before we jump into the front end, let's take a little detour to understand how the magic works in the backend. And trust me, this will make our journey smoother later. So grab your coffee or tea and let's get started. First things first is what's the backend even doing? So imagine the backend as the brain of your application. It handles all the boring, complicated stuff like verifying who you are and checking if you are allowed to see certain pages. In this tutorial, our backend is built using Express.js, which is like a super friendly framework for Node.js. So think of it as a toolkit that helps us build apps faster and easier. And don't worry if your real-time applications you're using different backend system, it doesn't matter. But for today, I'm just giving simple so you can have a complete understanding on how this works from A to Z. Now, we have set up a couple of important routes that I need to show you. First thing, if I go to my server folder, I got routes here, okay? Then I will go to the slash to the auth.js. And basically in Auth.js, we got a route here which is slash login, which is an endpoint for you that you'll be using in your front-end application. So this is where you go to log in. You send your email and password, and the backend checks if you are who you are as you say. If everything matches, it gives you a special pass called token. And this token is like a VIP badge that lets you access restricted areas of the app. Fancy, right? Next thing we have a slash register route, and this is another endpoint. This one is for new users to sign up. Right now, I haven't added the logic for registration because we are focusing on login and protected routes. So I will skip this one for now. The next thing we have is slash profile route. And this one is for fetching your user profile, stuff like your name, email, and role, but only if you are logged in. And that's why I place them in the protected.js route. The next route, which is also protected our route, is slash admin. It's got another level deeper than the profile, which is only for the admins. Regular users, sorry, there's no entry for you right here. Okay. Now, next thing is the gatekeeper, which is our middleware. So next up, we have this awesome thing called middleware. So think of it as a security guard. Our middleware is called Authenticate token. It checks if you have a valid token before you can access any protected routes. If your token is missing or it is invalid, then we say, sorry, there's no entry for you. So this keeps our app safe and secure as well. Next thing's our users. So we don't have a database for today's demo, so I just mock the user data for us right here. So our backend also have a fake database, so don't worry, it's just an array of users for now. Each user have an ID, email, password, and a role like admin or is it a user. The role decides what special powers you have in the app. For example, only admins can access the /admin route I showed you earlier. Now, next thing is the tokens. Tokens that are like your VIP pass. So let's talk about these tokens. A token is like your secret handshake between the backend and the front end. When you log in, the backend gives you this token and you need to show it every time you want to access something private. It is created using a library called JSON Web Token, okay, that you can install using your npm. And hey, the token also expires after some time, so it's not valid forever. And you can see here, for example, I add a property here, so my tokens can expire within 1 hour, okay? Now, this one is very important for security. If you go back to our actual server running, so you can see we imported the route, right? And also we imported our middleware. Then the protected routes, I'm calling them outs using /API/ whatever the name of my route. And then I'm adding that middleware as a guards or a safeguard to protect my routes. Okay. So basically, whenever I try to access these two routes, first thing we'll do is run my middleware. Okay. Check if I have token. If I don't have, then I can't access those API endpoints. If I have a token, then go ahead, get those API calls done, and fetch whatever data I want using those tokens. Now, this is our backend. All right, now let's recap what we have learned in this chapter quickly and what we have done in our backend. Firstly, we have the login, which verifies your email and password and give you back a token. Then we have the protected routes, which only lets you in if you have a valid token. We have role-based authorization, which makes sure admins can access certain routes and no one else. And in the next chapter, we will connect this backend to our React app and see how to make it work all together. And trust me, it is going to be super fun. So stay tuned and I will see you in the next chapter. Now I'm starting from a skeleton setup, which is very basic setup. We have few pages that they are already there for us that we'll be using and adding authentication to it. So at the moment, if you look at my screen, you will see that I have a navigation. I can see all my buttons like profile, admin, even though I'm not logged in. And then we have the sign in form coming up because we are in the /login page. So next thing we need to do to make sure our app is working is to authenticate, okay? Means have a login details, sign in, and then we will handle authorization after that. So step number one is to make sure our login page is working and the user able to log in. Up our code, and don't worry if this feels overwhelming. It's like assembling Lego bricks one at a time, and I will explain everything step by step, nice and easy. So if you are ready, let's get started. So our login page at the moment have an email and password. And for that reason, we created a state to track for us the entry of the users when they enter their email and their password as well. Then for later, when we start implementing API, we need the state of the error and the loading as well to have track of them. So that's why I created two states here to track for me the error and the loading. Now, we'll redirect the users, of course, to a specific page after a successful login, okay? And for that reason, we are using the use navigate from React Router DOM. As I'm using Vite as a template or as a base for my project, so I need to use React Router DOM, a third party to handle my routes. Then the next thing is I'm using the location and that to understand from where the user had came before, so I can navigate them back to the screen where they were. Okay, and you can see here I'm asking location.stay.from.path name. So we can have these values accessible to using React DOM router. Then the next thing, basically, I just have a function to handle submission of my form, which will come back to it. And this is basically a basic form. You have sign in, okay, a heading. Here, just having conditional rendering. So if there's any error that happens, I will display that error. And then I have my form, which all it have is email and it have a password. And when you submit your form, that's when you trigger that handle submit function that we have defined right here. Great. And that is it basically. Very simple form. Or what it do, it just gets your email, get your password, then submit it. Now, to submit it, we need to do a lot of things. Of course, setting up your state for errors and loading, but then the magic is when actually you get your API call to actually authenticate your users, okay? And in the try catch block, because everything's done in the backend, you just have to add that function here or your API call right here in the lane 21. And then if it's successful, then it will move to the next lane. If any problem happen with your API call, then you'll be catch in the catch block and throw an error. Okay. Now, how we can use the API or the server we created. Now to do that, we'll create a context to handle for us the authentication. And why I'm doing that is because first thing, it will give us that separation of concern. So our component is handling its own things and all the authentication logic like login or logout is are you authenticated or not, to be all handled in a separate file which I need to access as well later from other pages that we'll be building. So first thing, I'll go and create my new context. So inside my source folder, I'll create a new folder for context. And then I create a new file that I will call auth context.jsx. And this is basically, and this setup is a common pattern in React for managing authentication state. It provides an easy way for companies to share and manage user-related data like authentication tokens and user details across your full application. So let's break this down step by step. First, I need to import few things from React. So I'll close this on the left. So create context. So it helped me to create my context. Use context, which will help me to consume that context. And use state because we want to store details like the user details and the token details. And also use callback, which you'll see why we need it as well through the way. Next thing is to create actually my context, which should be like our bucket that's holding all that information for us. So I'll create a new variable. I'll call it auth context. And that will be equal to create context that we imported from React and we'll initialize it to null. Now the next thing is to create our context provider. So export const, I'll call it auth provider. And that will be equal to an arrow function that takes in an argument or a prop, which are children. Then, as I said, the first thing we need to do is track basically the user details and token that we'll be getting back when we authenticate. So I'm creating two states, one for the user, and I'm setting default value to null, and then the token that I'm trying to access at the moment from my local storage, because we'll be setting up our token in the local storage later as well. Now, next I want to do is define a function which called login that I can access anywhere in my application. So what I will do, I'll just paste some code quickly and I'll go through it. So all what I have done, I defined a new function. I'm wrapping it with use callback. As I told you, we will be accessing this throughout our app, and I don't want it to trigger for any small change in my context. So I'm saying I'm wrapping it with use callback, so only it triggers the first time when there are no changes. Okay. Now this one will be an async function which takes in an email, a password, and then I'm accessing my server and it's running on my local host port 5000. Okay, so I'm listening to my 5000 port, then slash API slash auth slash login, and that is a post call, and I'm passing on the email and the password to my API call. Then it's simple as just listening to it. If it's not, if there are problem with it, then throw an error saying login failed. If it's successful, then just access the response of JSON, store it in your data, and when you get the data back, I'm storing the data.user information in my state, and same for my token, I'm storing it in my state as well. After all done, I'm storing my token in my local storage within this item called token, so I can use it in my next API calls as well. Good. So that's basically what the logging function is doing. Next thing, we need to handle the logout as well, which I assume to be very simple for you to do now. Or what you have to do is set up your state to null for both users and the token, and then just remove that token property from your local storage. Now, we have our states, we have our both functions. Next thing is to see what things we need to have access to through our application and make them available. So what I will do, I'll create a new constant, I'll call it value, and that will be equal to whatever things I want to access. I want to access my user details, so I'll store it. I need to access my token, so I'll store it. I need the login function, I will store it. Logout as well, I need it. Then I will add a few other properties that I need as well. The first one is authenticated. So I don't have to do this check every time. I'll just do it once in my context. So is authenticated if we have a token, then I am authenticated, okay? And if you don't know from what this token is, again, the state that we created out there. So if you have tokens stored in your state, that means you are authenticated. The next thing we need is another property is called isAdmin, okay? So that is the role-based authorization. So if you remember, our server gave us back the users with a property called role. And if you are admin, the role will have value as admin. So I will say if user exist dot role is equal to admin. That's mean I am an admin. Otherwise, it won't be. Okay. Now I created an object with all values I need to access. Now I have to make them available. The next thing I have to do is return, and it's something we can call auth provider, auth context, and auth context have a property called provider. Okay, and then all what we have to do is pass on the children down inside my auth context provider. And this one we can pass on a property or a prop called value that you pass on whatever things you want to access through your app, which is the object we created, which name also is value. Great. Now we create our context. Next thing is to create a provider for our context that will help us to access this context easily. And usually this should be in a separate file for hooks, but for this today demo, I make things simple, and easy for you to navigate. I'll keep it in the same file as my context as well. So what I have called it is use auth, and this use auth basically check if my context, so we are using use context from React, or we are passing on the context we defined here earlier. Okay, so basically it's reading your context, it's trying to access your bucket. If that bucket doesn't exist, means you didn't create it yet, so we throw an error. Otherwise, it's just giving us simply back that context. Okay. Now with this one done, next step basically is to wrap our application with this auth provider so we can access all these magic things inside this bucket. So we have to go to our road project, which is app.js. And what I will do, I will import the auth provider. So import auth provider that I created. Then I have to wrap all my application within that auth provider. So I'll remove all this. I'll say auth provider, and then wrap on my app within that provider I created. Okay. Now easily within any page or any route within that auth provider, I have access to all these elements right there easily. So you can see it's really powerful, it's really helpful. It just remove further separation of concern issues, it will remove the prop dealing, it will remove also some multiple functions that you have to create many times or some logic you have to do every time in different page. Great. Now, next thing is to go back to our login page and start creating our login. So first thing first is to import our use auth, the hook we created. So use auth from our context that we created. And then next thing is to access the login function we defined right here, okay? Because we need it when we submit our form. So the way we can do it is very simple. And just say const and an object access the login that we make it available, and that will be coming from our use auth. So basically this login is the value we defined right there for our function, okay? Now our function is there. Next thing is just to go inside my handle submit and trigger the call using that function we are trying to access. And if you remember, that login function accepts an email and password which user inputs in our form. So in here, I'm just passing email from my state, local state, and the password as well from my local state as well. Now, next thing to go and test if our login will work successfully, and I'll be using the mock details of the users that we have in our server/service/user service. Okay, you can add also as many as you want. You want to use different one. Actually, I need to go and run my server, make sure it's running. It is all running great. Or actually, I'll stop it and let's run our server npm run. Oops, npm run dev. And that's our server running on this port. So I'll just copy it, go back to my browser and make sure I'm right there. Okay. Now I can see my home page. I want to go to /login and you can see it's breaking. So let's inspect and see what we have missed. And actually I did here a spelling, should be value equal to value. Let's go back to our browser and there we go. So we can see now our home page is coming up. Our login page coming up. I'll clear off all this, go to my network as well, clean it off, and let's try. The first one I'll try is the admin. So I'll say admin at example.com and admin and the password, and let's sign in. So as I sign in, I can see that my call is at 200 and I'm getting back a response with the user details and as well the token right there. Okay, and I can see that I am in my home page with a welcome message showing successfully. Now, next thing I want to do before moving to the other pages is fix my navigation. So I want a way that I can log out, and also the buttons I have like profile should only be visible if I'm logged in. And also the admin, I only want it to be visible when I am an admin user logged in. So let's use the same context we created earlier and it will give us back all the things we need here. So let's go and import it. So import use auth from our context. Then we go inside our functional components and keep in mind the hooks are only usable within your functional components. Okay, you can't use them within a class component. So let's access the things we need. So const that will be equal to our use auth, which is the hook we define for our context. Now we need to access a few things. First, the logout, of course, so I can log out. The next I want to know if I am authenticated, so is authenticated. The next thing I want to is I am admin or not, so is admin. Okay, so and those values are here. Logout is authenticated and is admin. Okay. Now what I will do here, I'll just make some conditional rendering. For example, the profile, I only want it to render if I am logged in. Okay, if I am authenticated. So enough for me to do if I am authenticated. Okay, then render for me this button here. So we're doing some conditional rendering. Next thing for the admin is a little bit level up. So authenticated is not enough. I need to be admin user to see it. Okay. So same thing, but I'll say if I am admin, then render for me this button right here. So let's go and paste it. And then for our sign in button, we just had to conditional or just uncomment this. So you don't see me typing everything. Oops, I'll remove these, I remove these, and there we go. So here basically again same thing. If I am authenticated, I'm will show a button saying sign out, and the on click will have the logout function being triggered. If you remember again our logout function, it just remove our user, remove our token, and clean up our local storage. Now if I am not authenticated, then I should see a sign in button. Okay, and all it does at the moment, it just makes sure it navigates you back to the login route if you are not on that page already. Great. Now let's save all this and go and test it again. So open up my browser or just hard reload. I will go to, and if you remember, I already logged in. So I have signed out now here. Okay. And if you remember, I was logged in as a user, not admin. So I can see here the admin button is gone. I still can see my profile, which I have to fix. It's not working. Let me hard reload this. And I see the home button, which I am in home. Okay, let's go and sign out. And you can see as soon as I sign out, the profile button is gone. Only home button is there. And this is a sign in button now showing. Now let's actually sign in as an admin. So I'll say admin, add example, and admin password. And you can see as I sign in as an admin, I can see again the profile button, I can see the admin button, and my sign out button now is showing there as well. So until now, everything's working perfectly and smoothly. Now, next you want to do is work on the profile and admin pages. And these profile and admin pages, they are not like our home page or our login page, okay? These pages only should be visible or accessible when you are logged in. And that's what we call protected routes in React, okay? So these routes should be protected. Only you can access them if you are logged in. If you're not logged in and you try to access them, we should navigate you back, for example, to an error screen or to a login page. Okay. Now, how we can do this? This is very simple. First thing, we need to create a protected route component that will wrap our protected route within this component. So let's go back and start. So I will go to component. I'll create a new component. I'll call it protected route.jsx. And here basically what I will do, I'll paste some code and we go through it together. So first thing, of course, I'm accessing my context because all my details about being authenticated, it is within that context. The next thing, I'm just defining a component, a very basic component. It takes in children. I'm adding also a property require admin, which you'll see how I will use it later as well. Now, first thing I'm doing, of course, to check the is authenticated and is admin, okay, from my context. Then I'm accessing also the location in my routes, okay, to know where I am or where I am coming from, right? The next thing I'm checking here is if I am not authenticated, and what will do is it will navigate me back to a login page, okay? And I'll pass on a state to my route with a value from location. So I'm telling my login page where did I come from. So when I log in, it takes me back to the route I came from. Next thing I'm checking if I am authenticated, then check if this route requires you to be an admin. If yes, then check if I'm not an admin user, then take me back to the home page. How we can do this? We need to go to our app.jx basically, and we have to change this routes definition right here. And what we will do, we'll add one level to wrap our actual pages. So let's import the components we create now. So import protected routes. Then we will go to our profile component, for example, and I will say first use the protected route, wrap my component within that one, then pass on my profile. And same thing we will be doing for the admin dashboard as well. So I'll remove this. I'll say wrap it within the protected route, which will do all the check for me, and then pass on my admin dashboard as a child of my actual component. Now, if you remember, we were saying here require admin. So if you go to app.jx, this profile should be accessible to any authenticated user, but the slash admin should be only accessible to the admin users. And that's when I add this extra property that I will tell here that my protected route for admin dashboard should be only required for the admin users only. Sounds good? Now let's go and test this and see if this will work. Let's go back to our browser, our hard reload, our sign out to make sure we start fresh. So you can see here, if it looks good, my bar is clean. I only have homepage and sign in. Now I will go and sign in and I will say I'm an admin. Then password. And you can see now successfully I can see my admin button. Let's go and try access it. There we go. It's not working. And reason why we have and to go and fix my admin page first. After that, next thing is to go and set up our admin page. Fix up first our admin dashboard, and for fact, we know now this component or this page or this route will only be loaded for logged in authenticated users with a role equal to admin. And let's say, for example, we want to fit some data on this page to show only for admins. And if you remember, in our server, we had a basic route for slash admin that will give us back some data. And for now, we are just hard coding some dummy data with some message saying sensitive data. But in real time, maybe you have some details about some dashboard or analytics or anything, okay? So let's say, for example, now when I am on that dashboard, I want to get this API call done. Now, what I have done, first thing is I created a hook basically to handle for me the API calls. Okay, so this use API basically have a base URL that will be getting our API calls done. It access the token and the logout from our context that we defined earlier. Then it just fetching some details, passing on the token to my header authorization, and then listening to the API call and getting back my response and handling some errors for me as well. So this is usually great when you have big applications, so you don't have to hard code all these things every time you have an API call. Okay, now this is very basic. Again, you can go through it. It's not related to actual authentication. It's just a best practice when you're working with React application and having API calls. And you can access this file in the link in the description within my GitHub account. Now, this basically already does just handle an API call for us. And what I want to do basically use this hook to get an API call and of this endpoint and display it in my dashboard. Nice. Now let's first import that hook. So import use API. Next thing basically is to add some state. We can restore that admin data we are loading, also to track the loading state and also track the error if any error happens while having this API call. Then we are accessing that function that will help us to trigger this API call from our hook. So this way our component is very clean. Next thing basically is to trigger this API call and get the data back. So we need use effect for that. Adding use effect where I define an async function that load the data for me. So I'm using the function I imported from my hook. I'm passing my endpoints that I want to call. Then I'm getting my data back. If that one's successful, I'm storing my data in my state. If something went wrong, then store an error in my state. Otherwise, when everything finish, happy or not, just set my loading state to false because we're all done. And this basically will trigger this function within our hook. And I want this hook to trigger every time this fetch with auth it changes so we can update our state. Now with this in place, I want to add few things to handle. For example, when my API is loading, I want to have a loading state. So I'm used listening to my state is loading. So if that one is true, just display a loading three dots on my screen. And same thing I will do for error. If any error happened, then I want to display a friendly UI to display the error for now to my users. Otherwise, if everything is great and I got my data back, just display my dashboard to the users. Good. Let's go now and test this. So I'll hard reload, sign out, sign in as a admin, then admin123, sign in, then go back to my admin page, and there we go. Now I can see my admin dashboard successfully with details coming from my sensitive data API. Great. Now next thing is to fix the profile as well. So let's go and do that now. Let's almost do exactly the same things what we have done in our dashboard. If you remember in our server, we have also an API endpoint for profile, which is also protected. Okay, so it's only can be called for authenticated users as well. And this one will help me to get a user details for the actual logged in user or authenticated user. So same thing we did for dashboard, we'll be doing for the profile as well. Okay, so first thing is to import the use API hook we created and also our context we created as well. Okay, the next thing is I have here a state to store my profile details, also loading an error to handle the state of my API call lifecycle. The next thing I want to do is access the function within my hook, use API hook, that helped me to trigger API calls. And I want the logout function as well because I want to add a button for the user to log out under the profile details. Okay. Now, next thing is to trigger the API call and get our data back for the actual logged in user. Again, same thing, you have to use effect to get an API call. Then I'm defining an async function where I can fetch the data from my endpoint. If it's successful, store the data in my state. If not, store the error. And when all these two is done, then just store the state of my loading to false. Great. Now, when that one is all completed, of course, I want to handle usually the loading and the error state as well. So I'll listen to my states. If my is loading state is true, display a loading message. If an error happened, then listen to my state error and then display the error message for me. Otherwise, if everything is great, I got my data back, just display my profile header with the name, email, and also my current role. I am admin or just a simple user. Then in my button, which is sign out button, I'm adding at the bottom, I'll just add the log out function that I'm accessing from my contacts. Simple as that. And you can see when you have a centralized code, it is too much easier to just keep reusing the same things again and again without having a lot of hard-coded work to be done or a lot of logic added everywhere in your application. Now let's try to sign in as a normal user. So user at example, and then we do user password as well. And you can see because I came from profile page, as soon as I logged in, it takes me back to the profile page. So I can see my profile details and you can see my link for the admin is gone. But let's say if I want to access that. So instead of slash profile, let me again check the route we are. Let me again check the route we are using to make sure I'm getting the correct one. So slash admin, let's see if we can access that. So if I go to slash admin, you can see it's navigating me back to my home page because I'm not an admin user. And that is the logic we added. If you remember, that is the logic we added in our protected routes.jsx, okay? So if you say we require admin what you are not, and you're trying to access that page, then just navigate them by default to the home page and replace also the current route link in our browser as well. Now, before we wrap up today's course is if you're still thinking how all this is working, it's all working because of this token, okay? So first time when you log in, you're getting a token back that we are storing in our context and also in our local storage so we can access it easily. Now, any API call you make through your application, in the header, we are passing authorization header with the token value passed into it. And what happens when you do this API call, it goes back to your server. Your server will take in this token and validate it. Is it a valid token or not? If it's valid, then it's come back with a response to you. But if it's not valid, like expired, then you'll get another response with a status of 401 saying that your session has expired. Please log in again. If you remember, we are only leaving this pass or this token valid for 1 hour. So if you authenticate now and you try after 1 hour and a half to get your dashboard details or profile details, you will get this error showing on your screen, which means you have to log in again. Okay, so this how all this is working and how all this authentication is working. Now, if you want to understand how the backend is doing all this work using Express and Node.js, feel free to check out my full in-depth tutorial for beginners on how to handle authentication in your backend server as well.